If I had known that one cup of coffee could burn away 65 years of dignity, I would have stayed in bed that morning. I was sitting quietly at the breakfast table in my daughter Jenna's sunny kitchen, cradling a warm mug in my hands. She had just made a fresh pot, too strong, the way her husband liked it. I thought it would be a quiet morning. I thought I was safe. Grandma, my grandson Mason said casually, like he was asking me to pass the butter. Can I borrow your credit card again? There's this thing I need for my gaming setup. It's only 5 grand. I didn't even flinch. I just said no. That's when Jenna snapped. She didn't yell right away. First, she let the silence crawl around us, thick and poisonous. Then, without warning, her hand flew toward me. Not to strike, no, she wasn't that bold, but she did something worse. She tipped my coffee mug straight into my lap, scalding hot. I gasped, leapt up, the ceramic hitting the floor and shattering. The liquid soaked into my thin pajama pants. My thighs stung. My dignity shriveled. Jenna didn't even blink. If you're going to be selfish, then maybe it's time you leave, she said, folding her arms like she was laying down some corporate policy. Either give Mason what he needs or find somewhere else to live. We're not running a charity. A charity? That word hit harder than the coffee. I stood there, dripping, burned, and silent, my eyes locked with hers, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of guilt. But no, it was calculation. I was being measured, weighed, and found inconvenient. $5,000, I repeated, voice calm but trembling. For a child? To buy gadgets? Jenna's lips curled. It's not a big deal. You've got money. You've been sitting on it ever since Dad died. I don't even know why you're being difficult. I've been paying for this house's utilities, I said softly, and I've never once asked you to cover my prescriptions. Her eyes rolled. You're lucky I let you stay here at all. After your surgery? Remember, you couldn't even walk without help. I've been managing your whole life, and now this? I wanted to scream, not just from the pain, but from the betrayal. They were never helping. They were positioning. Jenna's care came with strings. No, with ropes. Invisible at first, then tight, then cutting off circulation. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't my daughter anymore. Not really. This was someone who saw me as leverage, a resource, a stubborn old woman who had outlived her usefulness. Behind her, Mason looked bored, still waiting, still expecting the card. My hands were shaking as I grabbed a paper towel and dabbed up my legs. No one moved to help me. My breath was shallow. My heart thudded in my ears. Jenna crossed her arms and added with that same cruel smirk, "You either hand over the card or be out of here by the end of the day." There it was, not a request, a threat. I looked down at the spilled coffee pooling around the broken mug. One of the pieces had landed near my foot, a jagged little shard with a floral print, a piece of something once beautiful, just like me. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I walked slowly to the sink, rinsed my burned hands under cold water, and turned off the tap. Then I spoke. I'll be gone before sunset. Jenna blinked. I think she expected more resistance, but what she didn't know, and what I finally remembered, was this. Quiet doesn't mean weak, and some debts are paid not with money, but with silence and finality. The door clicked shut behind me, and I was alone in the guest room. My legs still stung, but the real pain wasn't from the coffee. It was from knowing that she meant it. She wanted me gone, not because she couldn't afford to keep me, but because I was no longer useful. I sat on the edge of the bed, my bed, the one I'd slept in after my hip replacement, the one Jenna had tucked me into every night at first, like I was still her mother, not her burden. She had insisted I stay with them, called it a temporary arrangement. I didn't argue. I was grateful. stupidly grateful. Now I could see it for what it was, a trap. She managed my prescriptions, grocery lists, and utilities for convenience, she said. She'd handle my banking so I could rest. She told the neighbors I was too tired to socialize, when in truth, she never even told me when they came around asking for me. And I let her. I let her help me right out of my own independence. I moved slowly to the closet. My suitcase was still on the top shelf, dusty but intact. I pulled it down carefully, clutching the edge of the dresser for balance. My hip ached, but I didn't wince. I didn't groan. Pain was familiar. What hurt more was that no one knocked. No one came to check on me. Jenna had screamed in the kitchen, loud enough for the whole block to hear, and Mason had watched me flinch and freeze and fumble for words, but they didn't care. Not enough to follow, not enough to soften the blow. I opened the top drawer and pulled out the envelope I'd hidden there months ago, beneath the linens. Copies of my birth certificate, insurance cards, a printout of my bank's routing number. I didn't fully know why I had stashed them away at the time, but now it made sense. Some part of me had always known this moment would come. As I packed, I made no sound. No sobs, no muttering. I folded each piece of clothing with steady hands. I rolled up my jewelry pouch, just costume pieces and one pearl ring from my late husband Harold, but it was mine. Mine. From the hallway, I heard the low hum of the television. Jenna was back to her usual routine, watching one of those home renovation shows she always claimed I wouldn't understand. Mason was probably in his room, headphones on, spending someone else's money online. I zipped the suitcase and sat back down, just for a moment. My eyes scanned the room. The framed photo of Jenna and me at her college graduation still sat on the dresser. She had insisted I be in that picture. I looked proud in it. I wasn't proud now. I was awake. The doorknob turned briefly, then it stopped. Heard me packing. Didn't care enough to open it. Or maybe they were hoping I'd disappear quietly, that they wouldn't have to say it again. They didn't know me at all. I sat back, suitcase at my feet, heart pounding like I was in an ER again, waiting for a diagnosis. But I already had one. I wasn't broken. I was discarded. And that meant I was free. I picked up my phone and scrolled down until I found the name I hadn't used in months. Gerald M., retired attorney. My neighbor. Once a friend, still kind. I hit call. He picked up on the second ring. "Eleanor," he said, "everything all right?" "No," I said, my voice steady, "but it will be." It was quiet after I hung up with Gerald. Too quiet. That awful buzzing kind of silence that only exists in houses where love used to live. I sat back down, one hand resting on my suitcase, the other brushing the edge of the nightstand where my reading glasses usually sat. But I hadn't read in weeks, not since the last time I felt like a person in this house, instead of inventory. That's when I noticed something. My purse. It was lighter than usual. I unzipped the front pocket. No wallet, no bank card, no ID. My heart skipped. I opened the second zipper, then the third. Nothing. My fingers started to tremble as I sat down on the bed and dumped the contents out. Loose peppermints, tissues, and old lipstick. No card, no wallet, nothing. I'd had it yesterday, I was sure of it. I used it to buy my prescription ointment at the pharmacy. Jenna had driven me and insisted on holding my bag while I walked slower. I thought she was being kind. No, she was creating an opportunity. I could hear her voice now, months ago, so casual at the time. "Let me just take care of your bills, Mom. It's easier if everything goes through one account. I'll set up automatic payments. You don't have to worry about anything. You just focus on healing." Okay. So I let her. I handed over access, passwords, accounts. I trusted my daughter, and now I couldn't even remember the last time I saw a bank statement with my name on it. She had started having everything go paperless again. To simplify, what a fool I'd been. The words came up in my throat like bile. They loved my money more than me. I wasn't family. I was a line item. I walked slowly to the dresser and opened the second drawer. I kept a small notebook in there, the kind I used to write grocery lists in when I lived alone. On the last page, I'd scribbled down my account numbers months ago, just in case. I stared at the numbers. Familiar. Mine. But when had I last seen the card that matched them? I checked the jewelry box under the mattress, even inside my old Bible. Nothing. They didn't just ask for my money, they took it. I sat back on the bed, dizzy. The sting of the coffee had faded. Now it was something colder, burning inside me. A humiliation that tasted like rust in the back of my throat. And here's what made it worse. I had let it happen. I let her become my keeper. I told myself she was helping, that she was stepping up, but no, she was stepping in front of me, over me, around me. I hadn't seen it clearly until that moment. Not when she told the bridge club I was too tired to play, not when she intercepted calls from my bank, not when she started pre-approving my Amazon orders like I was a child. She'd been locking the doors gently, one by one, until I had nowhere else to go. That was the part that nearly made me cry. I wasn't weak. I had survived 30 years in the ER, the death of my husband, and a hip that broke like glass. But I had not survived this gracefully. I looked at the framed photo of Jenna and me again, the one at her graduation. She wore that same smug smile then, too. Back before I knew that some daughters don't grow up to love you back, they just grow up to use your shadow. The phone buzzed. It was Gerald. A text. "I'm outside. Ready when you are." I stared at the screen, then at the broken pieces of trust scattered invisibly across the room. I wasn't just leaving a house today. I was leaving the lie that I still mattered to her. By the time I opened the door, Gerald was already halfway up the walkway, a calm kind of urgency in his step. He wore his usual navy windbreaker and carried a sturdy canvas bag, like we were just off for a picnic. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look me over like I was broken. He just said, "You ready?" I nodded. The house behind me was still quiet. No doors opening, no footsteps rushing to stop me. That silence, it was proof. Proof they thought I wouldn't leave, that I couldn't. Gerald picked up my suitcase and gently took the smaller tote from my shoulder. "You got everything?" he asked as we reached his car. "Everything I still own," I said. He opened the passenger door. "Careful with your hip." That one sentence almost broke me. Not because he was kind, but because I realized how long it had been since someone was kind without a receipt attached. The drive started in silence. I watched the streets blur past, each turn taking me further from the house that stopped being home the day Jenna started calculating my worth like it was a monthly bill. Halfway through town, Gerald finally spoke. "You know," he said, "I saw you crying last week." I blinked. "What?" He didn't look at me, just kept his eyes on the road. "On the balcony. You were sitting real still, holding that little ceramic bird. I didn't want to intrude." I didn't even remember the bird or crying. I guess I started, then stopped. It felt like I was living in someone else's life, a smaller one. I figured something was wrong when I didn't see you at the library anymore. That was the moment I realized how far the isolation had gone. Jenna didn't just take my money. She took my routines, my friendships, my freedom to walk 2 blocks and drink bad coffee from a paper cup while gossiping with the retired choir ladies. She didn't lock me in a room. She just made the rest of the world harder to reach. "You're not the first I've helped like this," Gerald said quietly. "Old folks getting managed right out of their autonomy. It happens more than people want to admit." I said nothing. I couldn't because I was too busy holding my tears in like they were passengers who'd missed their stop. I made a few calls this morning, Gerald continued. There's a place I think you'll like. Senior community with independent units. You mentioned once you liked the one with the koi pond. I turned to look at him. That place is too expensive. I saw the brochures before Jenna, said it wasn't realistic. Jenna also said you needed help ordering your own socks, he said dryly. Don't give her authority she never earned. That made me smile. Barely. He reached into the side console and pulled out a slim manila envelope. Start here. Just some pamphlets. Oh, and we'll talk to a financial protection officer, too. If what you're saying about the missing card is true, we may need to act sooner than later. I felt a thud in my chest. Not panic, not even dread. Just the sound of the truth landing where it finally belonged. I didn't want it to come to this, I whispered. She was my daughter. Gerald nodded, slowing the car as we approached a light. And sure, you loved her well. But sometimes love is just the paper around the poison. I looked out the window. Somewhere behind me, my house might have noticed I was gone. Maybe not. But ahead of me, for the first time in a long time, I saw a gate opening. Not a cage, a door. We pulled up to the gates just past 11. Golden Pines, that was the name. The sign was modest, no gold, no pine, just clean lettering on a weathered board. But the grounds beyond it looked like something out of a life I used to think belonged to other people. Hydrangeas in bloom, a shaded bench under a willow, a koi pond catching the sunlight like glass. Gerald parked and turned off the engine, letting the quiet sit. I stared at the entrance. I'm not ready, I said softly. For what? He asked. To want this. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. That was what I liked about Gerald. He never tried to fill silence with pity or pretty words. He knew some moments deserved space to breathe. We stepped into the main lobby, and that's when I realized something. The place smelled like lemon balm and fresh-baked rolls. Not antiseptic, not sadness. It smelled like living. The receptionist, Leia, stood to greet us, kind and not too sweet. You must be Eleanor. Gerald called ahead, said you'd be visiting today. Welcome. I almost corrected her. Visiting sounded so permanent. But I didn't because something inside me whispered, let it be. We toured the courtyard first. Gerald walked slowly beside me, letting me set the pace. We passed a small library, a crafts room, even a yoga class for seniors. I watched two older women laugh as they struggled to roll up their mats, and it hit me. They weren't being managed. They were living, choosing. Every room had sunlight. Every hallway had windows. No one looked over anyone's shoulder. No one asked for permission to go outside. When we reached the koi pond, I stopped. The fish glided under the surface, gentle and aimless, like they had nowhere urgent to be. I used to sit by water like this when I needed to think, before all of this. You still do. We sat for a while. I didn't speak. I just existed. For the first time in months, I wasn't someone's problem to solve. I wasn't Jenna's headache. I wasn't Mason's wallet. I was just Eleanor. When we finally went back inside, Leia led us to a quiet tea room and brought over a tray. 2 cups, a small plate of lemon cookies, a brochure. Nothing pushy, no speech, just a gentle offering. I held the cup in both hands, grateful for the warmth, and stared at the brochure. There in print was the thing Jenna had told me not to even consider. A studio with a kitchenette and balcony, month to month, no pressure, move-in ready. Don't get your hopes up, Jenna had said once. Places like that are for rich retirees, not people like you. I read the number again. It wasn't cheap, but it wasn't impossible. Not if I had what I used to have access to. My own accounts, a say in my own life. I don't know if I can afford this, I said quietly, more to myself than anyone. Gerald took a sip of his tea. Then let's find out. But first you filed a paperwork, a financial protection order. I'll help. That word landed hard in my chest. Protection. Not because I was fragile, but because I was done pretending I didn't need protecting from my own daughter. I looked at the brochure one more time, then at Gerald. Okay, let's start. And just like that, I stepped into a new chapter, one with locks only I held the keys to. At Gerald's kitchen table, I spread out every document I had left to my name. Insurance cards, old bank statements, a folder marked Medicare that Harold once laughed at for being so analog, and then a notepad, thin yellow, tear-streaked in places where I'd scribbled every suspicious moment I could remember. I know it's messy, I said, but I tried to keep track. Gerald adjusted his reading glasses. Messy is fine. Truth usually is. He flipped through the first few pages, nodding slowly. Recurring charges from stores you don't shop at, a Netflix profile named Masonator, PayPal withdrawals at 3 a.m. This is good. Really good. I sat across from him, my hands folded, back straight. I didn't feel small anymore, just focused. I had something they didn't expect. Evidence. The bank card had vanished, but my memory hadn't, and now that I was looking backward with clear eyes, the picture was coming into focus. Jenna had taken control under the guise of love. But it wasn't love. It was strategy. Do you have access to a printer? Gerald asked. I nodded. In Harold's old study, still hooked up to the old Dell. Then tomorrow, we'll scan these pages, he said. I'll connect you to a financial abuse specialist. They're discreet. They don't just handle bank reversals. They build protection cases. He paused. But we have to act soon. Once Jenna realizes you're not coming back, she might try to get ahead of this, especially if the accounts are still under her watch. They are, I said. At least some of them. But the title to the house... I trailed off. Yes, Gerald looked up. It's in my name. Jenna had it transferred before my surgery. She said it would help with hospital paperwork. Gerald blinked, then leaned back. You mean the house she's living in? Yes. He let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. Well, now that changes everything. He stood and reached for a small lockbox on the shelf behind him. Inside was a set of official-looking forms, tabs sticking out like teeth. You need to make copies of your documents, every page. Get notarized statements if you can. List the exact dates Jenna made withdrawals. Even better. I nodded, already reaching for my notepad again. My handwriting was shaky, but my memory was steady. Should I call her? I asked. Let her know I'm filing. No, Gerald said firmly. Let the paperwork speak. It'll say it better than you ever could. That line stayed with me. Let the paperwork speak. Let it carry all the words I wanted to scream but never dared. Let it bear witness to the years of quiet erasure. The theft wrapped in hugs. The smothering dressed up as care. Let it say what I couldn't. You tried to own me, but I kept the receipts. That night, I scanned every single page. I sorted folders until midnight. My back ached, my eyes stung, but I didn't stop because now I had a purpose bigger than survival. Now I had a case. And whether or not they ever apologized, the record would remain for the lawyers, for the courts, for me, because I was finally putting it all on paper. The truth they never thought I'd live long enough to tell. Jenna didn't know I still had the title deed. She never asked, never thought to. She just assumed her temporary guardianship of my life had become permanent, like everything else she quietly claimed. So when she pulled into the driveway 2 days later and saw a stranger standing in her front yard with a clipboard, I imagine it felt like a glitch in her own system. The perfect order she'd built, cracks forming. The stranger was a real estate agent, a woman named Carla. I'd spoken to just yesterday, referred to me by Gerald's connections. Professional, discreet, and not the type to gossip. Jenna stepped out of her car, furious already, I'm sure. I wasn't there. I was exactly where I needed to be. 3 towns over on the shaded balcony of my temporary apartment at Golden Pines, a glass of iced tea in one hand and a signed property reassessment form in the other. Gerald had dropped it off that morning. I didn't need to be present for the storm. I just needed the paperwork to arrive first. Jenna called me. Of course she did. 3 times in a row, straight to voicemail. The 4th time I answered. Mom, what the hell is going on? There's a realtor here doing a walkthrough of my house. Your house, whatever, she said. You ordered an evaluation. I waited a full second before replying. Correct. Silence, then venom. You're not serious. I'm very serious. I could practically hear her pacing. You don't even live here anymore. What is this, some kind of guilt trip? Are you trying to embarrass me? No, I said plainly. I'm just reclaiming what was always mine. This is my home, she hissed. No, I said again, calm and absolute. It's the home you've been squatting in, managing with money that was never yours. I let you play caretaker. That role is now revoked. You can't just throw us out. I didn't throw you out, Jenna. You told me to leave. The silence after that was like snowfall, soft but suffocating. She had no idea I remembered everything. How the deed had been transferred into my name under the guise of helping with medical paperwork. How I'd signed everything back then without reading closely, trusting her. But I did read one thing. One thing I remembered. I never gave her full power of attorney. So technically, legally, and morally, the house was mine. And now it was being reassessed, prepped for listing, protected from her. Jenna finally spoke again, low and icy. You're being cruel. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. Instead, I said the one sentence that silenced her completely. You only miss me now that I said no. I ended the call. Carla texted me half an hour later. Evaluation completed. Client Jenna attempted to interfere, but I remained professional. Strong potential for resale. We'll follow up tomorrow. Gerald called later, too. She tried to call me, he said. Left a voicemail full of threats. Let her threaten, I replied, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of her anger. I wasn't even angry myself anymore. I was something scarier. Certain. Certain that love without respect is just possession. Certain that family means nothing when it's built on control. Certain that even if I had nothing left but this chair, this tea, and my name on a legal document, I would still be freer than I ever was in that house. That night I went to bed early, and for the first time in years, I locked the door. Not because I feared what might come in, but because I finally had something worth keeping out. Later that afternoon, Gerald stopped by. I told him what happened. She came all this way just to be denied at the door, he said, shaking his head. She must have expected a different version of you. She expected the old version, I said, the one who thought silence meant peace. He nodded slowly. That version's gone. We walked out to the garden together. I carried a small tray with 2 iced lemonades the staff had left for us. I didn't need to explain what had happened. They already knew. I settled onto the garden bench, the one I liked best, the one with the ivy climbing up its legs and the view of the koi pond just a few yards away. A soft breeze stirred the leaves. Jenna had come all that way for something. Control, maybe. A confession. A reversal. She left with nothing because I had nothing left to give her. Not guilt, not permission, not even my attention. And the peace I felt in that moment, it didn't come from winning. It came from the sound of footsteps leaving without an open door behind them. I reached for Gerald's hand and gave it a light squeeze. I don't think I'm afraid of her anymore, I whispered. He smiled. That, he said, means she's really gone. 2 days later, Gerald called me just after breakfast. It's time, he said. You still want to sell the house? I didn't hesitate. Yes. He met me an hour later at Golden Pines, a file folder in hand. Inside was the full title deed, my notarized identity verification, and a trust form, blank, but ready to protect everything Jenna thought was hers. We sat on the sun porch, papers spread between us. She's going to come unglued, I said. Gerald smirked. Let her. Unglued means exposed. I signed line after line, print, initial, signature. Harold would have teased me for the way my tongue stuck out a little when I focused, but this wasn't just a sale. It was a severing. The house Jenna lived in, claimed, bragged about, it was never hers. She painted the walls, sure, bought a couch with my credit, yes, changed the doorknobs, picked out tile, but the bones, the foundation, that was my name, always had been. We filed the trust paperwork, discreetly transferring the property into the Eleanor Marks Irrevocable Living Trust, not because I feared a lawsuit, but because I wanted something ironclad. Not even a manipulative daughter could break into that. By the next day, the title had shifted. Jenna wouldn't know yet, but the law would. And I had something else brewing too. With the help of a financial abuse specialist Gerald connected me to, I submitted a request to freeze all transactions tied to my original bank account. Anything processed in the past 6 months would be flagged. The specialist asked if I had backup evidence. I have 12 pages, I said, handing her the journal, documented with dates, details, and withdrawals. She flipped through it, eyebrows rising higher with every page. "You weren't just being used," she said. "You were being harvested." I didn't flinch because I knew. And now, so did the law. I returned to Golden Pines with an unusual sense of lightness. Not joy, no, not yet, but there was something like breath in my chest again, like I wasn't holding everything in just to stay polite. Back in my room, I pulled out the envelope Harold left me the year before he passed. I'd never opened it. It sat at the bottom of my keepsake box, marked in his handwriting, "Only when you're tired of pretending you're okay." I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter. Short, just a few lines. "Eleanor, if they ever make you feel smaller than the woman I married, don't argue, don't explain, just leave. You don't owe anyone the right to dim your light. Use what's yours and make damn sure they can't take it again." Underneath was a check, uncashed, $10,000. I stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed. A real aching laugh that made my ribs hurt. He knew. Even then, Harold had known the world could turn, even family. I called Gerald. "You busy?" I asked. "For you? Never." "Then let's sell a house," I said, "and open a trust they can't touch." He paused. "You ready for the fallout?" I looked around my room, the sun streaming in, the koi pond sparkling, my bridge scarf hanging on the chair. "Yes," I said, "because this time I'm not reacting. I'm reclaiming." And that check? I deposited it that afternoon. Not because I needed the money, but because I wanted the world to know I wasn't done building. Jenna always thought she'd get the last word. She counted on it. Her voice louder, her texts longer, her threats wrapped in guilt and faux concern. She thought silence was surrender. So when the letter arrived, thick with legal tone and official seals, I imagined she stood in her doorway for a long time before opening it. And when she did, the sound of the lock slamming shut echoed, without me ever having to speak. Inside that envelope was the beginning of the end. A formal notification from the Trust's legal counsel. Effective immediately, Jenna Andrews is no longer authorized to access any accounts, property, or financial records belonging to Eleanor Marks. It was short, professional, bare. No blame, no begging, just boundaries. That's what drove her mad. She called me 7 times that day. I didn't pick up. The 8th time, she left a voicemail. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You're listening to him instead of your own daughter. Do you even understand what you're doing? You're throwing away your family." Family. She used that word like it was armor, like it should have been enough to erase everything she'd done. The pressure, the gaslighting, the theft. But family isn't immunity. It's a privilege. and she lost it the moment she poured scalding coffee on my lap and called it my fault. I forwarded the voicemail to Gerald, just in case. Then I did something quiet but powerful. I mailed her nothing. No response, no explanation. I let the letter do what I never could. Draw the line with ink and law and consequences she couldn't cry her way out of. Gerald called that evening. "She got it, didn't she?" "Oh, she got it," I said, sipping chamomile from my favorite chipped mug. "You can always tell when they realize the power is gone." He laughed. "You didn't even flinch." "Why would I said. "I've already buried the version of me that would have explained herself." That night, I slept with the windows open. The air smelled like rain. And in my dreams, I wasn't hiding. I was standing in the middle of that house, my house, holding a set of keys I never gave away. Jenna was nowhere in sight. No yelling, no begging, just echoes. The next morning, I found a small white envelope slipped under my door at Golden Pines. Handwritten, no return address. I knew it was her. I didn't open it. I tore it in half and dropped it straight into the shredder at the front desk. Because this time, I wasn't curious. This time, I didn't need to hear her say she was sorry, only to follow it with "but." This time, I trusted the silence more than her words. And silence, when chosen, is its own kind of strength. Later that afternoon, Gerald brought over a few papers for me to review. Updates to the trust, a list of protected accounts, and a few phone numbers in case I ever needed direct contact with law enforcement or the trust officer. As I signed the last form, he looked up at me. "You know," he said, "you've done something a lot of people never get to do." "What's that?" "You ended the cycle. Not with a bang, not with a scream, but with a locked door and a clear name." I leaned back in my chair, and for the first time since Harold died, I let myself believe I'd finally come home to myself. It happened on a Thursday, just after lunch, when the halls of Golden Pines were quiet and the sun had cast that soft, golden glow over everything, like it always did just before the koi pond lit up. I was sitting on a garden bench with Marjorie, our hands resting on the same folded quilt between us. We had just finished our usual chat about the bridge tournament schedule and how none of the new ladies shuffled properly. Gerald was due to join us soon, and that's when I saw them, Mason and Jenna, walking up the curved brick path that led to the front entrance. Jenna's stride furious and too fast, Mason lagging behind in that entitled, slouched way that made my stomach turn, even before I remembered the $5,000 coffee incident. They were coming for a showdown, but what they didn't know was I had nothing left to lose. The security guards spotted them first. Doris, bless her sharp eyes and steady stance, stepped out from behind the front desk before they could even touch the door. I saw Jenna gesture wildly, pointing past Doris toward the back garden. Mason shoved his hands in his hoodie pocket and rolled his eyes. Doris stood firm. I didn't get up, didn't run, didn't even flinch. Marjorie glanced toward the entrance and stiffened. Should I call Gerald? No, I said. Let her see me calm. I wanted Jenna to witness what peace looked like when it wasn't begging for her approval. She finally spotted me through the glass. She moved to push past the desk. Doris stepped in. Jenna raised her voice. I couldn't hear the words, but the shape of them was familiar. Rage, desperation, that choking cocktail of control slipping through fingers. Mason finally noticed me too. His eyes met mine, and for a second, I saw it. Not guilt, not love, but panic. Not because he missed me, because the money was gone and I wasn't going to be milked anymore. Doris raised a hand, then pointed firmly back toward the parking lot. Jenna threw her arms up. Mason muttered something and turned first. Good, let the boy lead for once. Jenna stood there for another moment, arms stiff at her sides, face pale with anger. And for the briefest moment, her lips trembled. She mouthed something, "Mom." But I didn't move, didn't wave, didn't rise. I stayed right there on that bench, holding Marjorie's hand wrapped in the same quilt Harold used to drape over my shoulders when I fell asleep on the couch during Jeopardy reruns. They left. I watched until there were small shadows on the driveway, until the engine rumbled and the car pulled away like it hadn't once held my entire life inside it. Marjorie let out a breath. "You didn't even blink." I smiled. "I already said goodbye. They're just now hearing it." Later, Gerald arrived with a bag of scones and a small bouquet of flowers from his garden. I told him what happened. He nodded. "They'll try again." "I know," I said, "but I won't." That night, I wrote in my journal, "When they came with fury, I stayed with peace." That's how you know it's over, when you don't need to yell back. I tore the page out and slipped it into a small frame beside my bed, because next time they come looking for a reaction, all they'll find is a reflection of themselves on the other side of a locked door. It arrived 2 days later, a small ivory envelope, hand-addressed, dropped into my Golden Pines mailbox. The handwriting was unmistakable, perfect cursive, just slanted enough to pretend elegance. Jenna's. I stared at it for a full minute, not because I didn't know what it was, but because I did. Marjorie spotted me standing still in the lobby, letter in one hand, coffee in the other. "From her?" she asked. I nodded. "Want me to open it for you?" "No," I said. "I don't need anyone else to see this lie." I didn't open it there. I walked it upstairs, laid it on the small writing desk Harold used to sit at, and waited until the sun hit the far window, just like it used to when I'd help him with taxes and letters to his war buddies. Then I sat down, took a breath, and opened it. The first word, Mom. Not dear, not I'm sorry, just Mom, like she still had that right. The first paragraph was exactly what I expected. A few shaky attempts at regret, how things got out of hand, how she never meant to make me feel pushed aside, how it all happened so fast. She used the word misunderstanding, like a Band-Aid. Then came the real reason she wrote. Line 3. "We're having a hard time now. Bills piling up. Mason didn't qualify for the car loan after all." There it was, the ask. Like always, the apology was just bait, and I was supposed to swallow it whole because I used to, because once upon a time I believed in second chances without proof. But I wasn't the same woman who'd let Jenna rearrange her mail and call it kindness. I wasn't the woman who softened every instinct just to keep the peace. I had made peace with something else now. The fact that not every daughter is a blessing. Some are warnings. The letter ended with, "Maybe we can talk. I really miss you. We all do." I closed the page and stared at the envelope again. It was thick, like she'd enclosed something extra. I reached inside. There it was. A personal check from me, drawn from one of the joint accounts she'd once set up just to help streamline. Uncashed, torn slightly at the corner, $3,500 in the memo, car repairs. I hadn't written it, but my name was printed on it clear as daylight. She must have kept it or forged it or both. I didn't need to know which. All I knew was this. Wasn't an olive branch. It was bait, dangled with a fake tear and a familiar signature. I folded the check in half, then in half again, then again, until it disappeared in my palm like every false promise she'd ever made. I walked it straight to the shredder. Not a word, not a flinch, just paper turning into dust. I left the envelope open on my desk, let it sit there like a carcass, a reminder that not every letter is meant to be answered. When Gerald came by later that afternoon with his usual lemon cake, he saw it and raised an eyebrow. She tried again. I handed him the remaining half of the letter. He read it in silence, then handed it back. "Still thinks you're a mark." "Not anymore," I said. That night I didn't journal. I didn't need to, because the sentence had already written itself in my head. I don't care what you meant. What you did was enough. The call came just after dawn. I was up early, watching the koi through the morning mist, a cup of hot water steeping beside me. Gerald's voice was calm, but firm. The trust flagged. "Another forged check, same account, same signature, but you didn't write it?" "I know," I said. "She sent me one last week." There was a pause. Well, he said, now the bank knows too. Turns out Jenna tried one more time to dip into my old accounts, but this time the trust's protective locks snapped shut, and the bank had proof. Withdrawals, signatures, emails from her IP address, even a voice message she left for a representative asking what her mother's balance was, as though she still had any right to my name. She wasn't subtle. She was desperate. Gerald continued, the financial abuse specialist filed a report with the Elder Protection Unit. It's being reviewed by investigators as we speak. My chest didn't tighten, it expanded, because I finally knew I hadn't just escaped. I'd set the trap. A few hours later, 2 plainclothes officers showed up at Golden Pines. Not for Jenna, but for a quiet interview with me. Courteous, gentle, one took notes while the other asked for my records, my journal, the history of withdrawals. I handed them copies of everything, itemized, highlighted. I was ready. When they left, the younger officer said, "You're not the first, Mrs. Marks, but you're one of the few who saw it early enough." I almost corrected him. It wasn't early, it was just early enough. By noon, I had received confirmation that Jenna was under investigation for financial misconduct, elder fraud, and forgery. Mason had been mentioned in at least one flag transaction. I didn't rejoice, but I didn't mourn either. I sat in the garden and thought about every time she told me, "You're lucky to have me," while rearranging my entire life into something that served her. She had always treated me like a locked door she already held the keys to. She never thought I'd change the locks, but I had. Marjorie came by later that afternoon with warm banana bread and 2 mugs of ginger tea she knew everyone at Golden Pines knew by now. Not because I told them, because they watched the storm come and saw me remain seated through it. "Do you think she'll be arrested?" Marjorie asked gently. "I don't know," I said, "and it's not up to me anymore." That's what freedom felt like. Not vengeance. Distance. Jenna had already lost the one thing she couldn't forge back. Access. Access to me, to my name, to my mind, my life. She didn't just lose money. She lost the game. Because when you gamble on someone's silence, and they finally speak, that's the moment you realize you were never winning. Later that night, Gerald and I sat on the back patio under a wide navy sky. He poured us both a small glass of wine and said, "She underestimated you every step of the way." "I underestimated me too," I replied. He raised his glass to recalculating. We clinked, and I said something I hadn't said in years, but knew was finally true. I'm safe. Not just from Jenna, but from the need to explain myself to anyone who ever thought my kindness meant surrender. That night, I slept with the window open again, and when the wind picked up, it didn't sound like warning. It sounded like applause. The next morning, I woke early and brewed a pot of strong black tea, just the way Harold used to make it. I carried my cup out to the garden, wrapped in my favorite shawl, and sat by the koi pond. The fish drifted lazily beneath the surface, gliding in slow, elegant circles like they knew they had time. That was the gift I'd given myself. Time. Not just to recover, but to remember who I was before I became a burden in someone else's narrative. The day passed peacefully. Small talk in the tea room, a book club meeting in the lounge, where I finally finished the last chapter of the novel I'd abandoned months ago, not because I didn't enjoy it, but because back then I couldn't focus. Too much noise, too many walls closing in, and now, silence was space. The next surprise came in the form of a formal letter, not from Jenna, but from her lawyer. I opened it slowly, fingers steady, eyes scanning each line. The words tried to sound legal, courteous, restrained, but they were hollow in tone. A request for mediation, a suggestion that misunderstandings had escalated, a proposal to sit down and discuss possible family reconciliation. I laughed out loud, not bitter, just amused, a laugh that pulled from deep in my stomach and floated out like steam from my teacup. I handed the letter to Gerald, who read it and blinked. "Is this a joke?" "I think they think I'm bluffing," I said. He shook his head. "Well then, they've never met the Eleanor Marks I know. And trust me, this version isn't bluffing." He drafted a reply. Short, sharp, absolute. "We decline mediation at this time. All property and financial rights remain solely under the authority of the Eleanor Marks Irrevocable Living Trust and will not be altered per previous agreements and verified documentation. Silence followed. Days of it. Blessed, pure silence. No calls, no letters, no drama. Just crisp autumn mornings and the rustle of newspaper pages on the patio. Gerald and I had started a routine. Coffee, crossword, news, silence. I didn't need more than that. One evening, Marjorie joined us, bringing a deck of cards in the old wooden box Harold had once carved for me, years ago when he still had the patience for woodwork. We played gin rummy until the sun dipped low, then walked together back inside. The next morning, another envelope. This time from the financial abuse specialist. A summary of findings attached to a formal report being submitted to the local district attorney. Charges pending, chase file marked active. I sat quietly with it, rereading the words. Jenna Andrews under review for misappropriation of elder assets, unauthorized access and forgery. Mason Andrews listed as secondary party, investigation ongoing. And in that moment, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt whole. Because I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't exaggerated or overreacted or made drama. I'd seen the truth, and now others saw it too. That night, I did journal, not with pain, but with clarity. I wrote, "Today, someone else finally believed me, not because I cried loud enough, but because I documented the quiet enough." "Tomorrow we'll go to the notary," Gerald said. "The paperwork for the full property transfer will be final." I nodded. "What time?" "After brunch. We'll get your favorite after." "I want scones and lemon curd." Gerald smiled, already in the plan. He paused, looked at me across the table. "You know," he said, "Jenna's gonna spiral again." "I know," I said, "and I don't have to catch her." I leaned back against the patio chair. The wicker creaked but held firm, just like me. We didn't say anything for a while, just sipped our tea and listened to the sound of koi brushing the surface like silk. The wind smelled like rosemary, and the stars overhead blinked softly like they too had been watching, waiting, and now approving in their quiet way. I went inside and lit a candle for Harold, not for grief, but for gratitude, because somehow his love had outlived him, quietly, waiting in an envelope until I needed it most. The next day, as promised, we signed the final round of papers, every line of ink, every legal term a thread in the safety net I was weaving for myself. No more loose ends, no more back doors, only locks I held the keys to. Gerald made copies, notarized and scanned every page, uploading them to a protected drive and sending digital backups to my newly established independent email account, separate from anything Jenna ever touched. I smiled at the inbox icon, bold, new territory. Later that afternoon, a phone call from Jenna's attorney. Again. Gerald took it, his voice calm, his words exact. "No changes, no comments. My client stands by the trust. Thank you. Goodbye." And with that, it was done. Truly, finally done. I leaned my forehead against the cool window pane overlooking the garden below. A group of residents played shuffleboard, their laughter light, airy like music. I never thought I'd hear again. Inside, something loosened. Not weakness, release. I made tea and sat in the library watching the koi until dusk. My name was mine again. My life was mine again. I no longer needed Jenna's permission for anything, not even to breathe. And as the sun set and the lanterns flickered along the garden paths, I closed my journal and whispered 3 words into the quiet. Not out loud, not for show, just for me. I am safe. The next morning, I woke with the kind of lightness that only comes after years of weight have finally been set down. I opened the curtains wide, letting the early light spill in across my small room at Golden Pines. My bed was still warm, my tea kettle hummed gently in the corner, and for a moment I allowed myself to stand still, simply breathing. I hadn't had to ask anyone's permission for anything, not for tea, not for peace, not for space. And that absence of control was more powerful than any confrontation Jenna might have staged. I pulled out my favorite cardigan, the blue one with the loose buttons, and curled into the reading nook Harold had once joked was too small for any adult. but I fit fine now, with my knees tucked up and a crossword book in hand. The calm didn't last long. Another envelope arrived, this one in a more aggressive shade of ivory with bold lettering and a return address from a different law firm. Gerald reviewed it first, his lips pressed into a hard line as he read. He didn't look up when he passed it to me, but I could already see the truth on his face. Jenna was contesting the trust. Not formally, not through probate yet, but through intimidation. She was requesting documentation of every financial decision made since the formation of the trust, arguing undue influence, claiming that Gerald had manipulated me, that I was unwell. It was a subtle twisting of words, but I'd seen enough medical charts in my ER days to know when something was malignant. The intent was not truth. The intent was fear. Gerald shook his head. It's not going to hold up. Her claims are empty, and even if she tries to pursue it, the trust is airtight. You documented everything better than most attorneys do. But I saw the flicker in his eyes. Not fear for himself, but concern for me, for my energy, for my peace. Do I have to respond? I asked eventually. Not personally, he said, but we'll send a formal rebuttal. She's trying to rattle you, but we've built walls too strong to shake. It still rattled something deep in me, not because I was afraid, but because I hated how predictable it all was. Jenna didn't miss me. She missed the money and the control and the narrative where I played the grateful dependent, quietly sipping her kindness like it was a privilege, not a cage. I spent that afternoon walking the grounds. I visited the koi pond, sat on the far bench, and counted every orange spot on every fish. Marjorie joined me halfway through, and we said nothing for 10 minutes. Just breathing, just being. Two women who'd earned their air. After everything, she finally spoke. She's not going to stop, is she? No, I said, but I don't have to start again either. That evening, Gerald came by with folders full of case law and examples of similar failed challenges. Every one of them ended with the same conclusion. When the paper trail is strong, the lies fall apart like dust in water. I stayed up late organizing my own copies, putting sticky notes on key pages, highlighting quotes and findings, and building what he called my quiet fortress in ink and law and truth. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about the right to be left alone, the right to not be preyed upon just because I aged with a kind face instead of fists. The next morning, I got a call from the financial abuse officer assigned to my case. Mrs. Marks, we've received formal confirmation that your trust is not subject to challenge based on all verified materials. The bank has permanently removed Jenna Andrews from any access, and Mason Andrews has been flagged for review of his involvement should we pursue juvenile fraud charges. You'll be contacted. I thanked her, hung up, and let the silence settle around me. It wasn't empty, it was earned. Later that day, a new resident moved into Golden Pines, a tall, elegant woman with a booming laugh and a cane decorated in glitter. Marjorie and I welcomed her with tea and banana bread, and for the first time, I found myself talking about things that weren't pain or betrayal or loss. I told her about Harold, about my old house, about the bridge tournaments I used to win. She smiled. You've lived a lot, she said. I've endured a lot, I replied gently. She tilted her head. Same thing, I think. I let those words sit with me for hours. That evening, I pulled out my photo album. Not the one Jenna had curated for the shelf, but my real one, full of old Polaroids, fading snapshots, handwritten captions, and Harold's looping script. I found a photo of Jenna as a child in pigtails, missing teeth, and beaming into the camera. I didn't feel hatred. I felt history. She was my daughter once. She loved me once, maybe. And I had loved her, still did, in a way that felt like mourning. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. I tucked the photo into a small envelope labeled Past and placed it in the bottom drawer. I would not let my memories be revised, but I also wouldn't carry them like armor anymore. The next morning, a staff member brought me a voicemail left at the front desk. Someone called to ask to speak to you, refused to give a name, but left a message. I listened to it alone behind the closed door of my room. The voice was unmistakable. It was Mason. Grandma, please. I didn't know everything. I thought Mom was helping. I didn't mean to hurt you, I swear. Things are bad now, and I'm just sorry. Please don't let them take the car. It wasn't mine anyway." The message cut off. I stood there holding the recorder in my hand. Not angry, not sad, just done. They didn't miss me. They missed the access. That message would go into the file, along with everything else. Not for revenge, but for truth. Gerald stopped by that afternoon with flowers and updates. We finalized the last account transfer that legally ensured not a penny of my savings could ever be accessed without my direct written consent. I signed the document with a flourish and asked him to frame a copy for me. We laughed, but we both knew I was serious. And as he slid the paper into a plastic sleeve and tucked it into the folder, he said it again. "You did it, Eleanor. Not many people come out the other side of this with their name intact." I smiled. "Not many people have a Harold and a Gerald," I replied. That night, I walked through the halls of Golden Pines slowly, my hand trailing along the painted rail like I used to do in the hospital when making late-night rounds. I passed the library, the crafts room, the lounge where two residents were watching a movie, and I stopped in the courtyard, standing under the stars and the branches of a tree older than any of us. I whispered a thank you to no one and everyone, to Harold, to Gerald, to myself, and to the quiet that followed me like a loyal friend. Not silence to endure, but silence that I had chosen and finally understood. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, not from noise or pain or even habit, but because something inside me stirred like a bird stretching its wings after too long in a cage. I wrapped myself in the same robe Harold had bought me on our 30th anniversary, threadbare at the sleeves but soft as memory, and stepped outside onto the small balcony connected to my room at Golden Pines. The world was hushed, the koi pond barely rippling, the sky a pale gray canvas waiting to be painted. I took my tea in both hands and watched the day begin. This would be my life now. Quiet, not because I was silenced, but because I had finally silenced the noise that once dictated my every move. I didn't check my phone for messages, didn't brace for conflict. I simply sipped and let the peace settle where tension once lived. By mid-morning, Gerald arrived, dressed in one of his classic button-downs and carrying a small envelope. Inside was a final legal confirmation from the State Elder Affairs Division, confirming that Jenna and Mason were barred from any contact involving my estate, finances, or healthcare decisions. It was official now, not just protected, but sealed. Gerald placed it gently in my filing drawer beside the documents that had restored my life. "This will be the last time we have to update this folder," he said with a smile. I nodded, grateful and tired in the best way, the kind of tired that meant rest was allowed. After he left, I walked the perimeter of the property alone, for the first time without a guide or staff escort. I passed residents tending the garden and waving from benches, and I felt something I hadn't in months, rooted. Not to a house or a name, but to myself. Later, I found myself in the Golden Pines art room, a place I had avoided before, afraid of what it might feel like to start something new. But that day, I chose a canvas and began painting. Not anything complicated, just a pond, some fish, a willow tree. It wasn't about talent. It was about beginning, and each stroke was a sentence I never got to say out loud. I forgive myself, not for trusting Jenna, but for staying quiet so long. The week passed softly. I spent my days walking the gardens, chatting with Marjorie, and learning to laugh without hesitation. On Thursday, Gerald brought lunch, and we ate outside on the main lawn. A picnic of roasted chicken and rosemary bread and lemonade. He toasted me with his glass. "To the woman who dared to lock the door and throw away the key." I raised mine. "To the friend who stood by when everyone else saw a bank account instead of a person." As we finished dessert, Marjorie arrived with a small package wrapped in lavender paper. Inside was a simple bracelet made of ceramic beads, each one unique in shade and shape. "Just like us," she said, clasping it around my wrist. I wore it like a medal, not for war, but for survival. Later that evening, I sat under the stars, notebook in hand, not to plan, not to remember, but to dream. I wrote down places I wanted to visit, cafes I wanted to try, books I would finally finish, classes I might enroll in, everything I once put off because my days were swallowed by someone else's needs. Jenna never saw this version of me. She never bothered to. But that wasn't my loss. It was hers. The following Sunday, Golden Pines hosted a small music night. Local students played piano and cello under string lights, while residents sipped cocoa and swayed in their seats. I sat front row, eyes closed, head tilted, letting each note undo another knot of the past. And when the final piece ended and applause broke out, I didn't clap right away. I just smiled, because peace doesn't need permission to take up space. It already belongs where it's wanted. On Monday morning, I received a final letter from the district attorney's office, brief and decisive. Jenna Andrews has been formally charged with 2 counts of elder financial abuse and 1 count of forgery. Mason Andrews has been issued a written warning with conditions attached. The letter was printed on thick paper, the kind used for birth certificates and court orders. I ran my fingers along the edge, felt its weight, and set it aside. I would not frame it. It wasn't a trophy, just a page in the file. I wasn't chasing punishment. I had already claimed my prize, a life of my own choosing. Gerald stopped by again, this time with 2 boarding passes. I raised my brow before even reading them. Paris, he said. You once told me you wanted to see the water lilies at the Orangerie. I did, didn't I? He smiled. Time to trade Koi for Monet, Eleanor. The flight is in 3 weeks. I stared at the ticket long and hard, thinking about every reason I could say no. The hip, the money, the fear. But I looked around my room and realized none of those lived here anymore. I folded the ticket slowly, tucked it into my journal, and whispered, "Let's go." That night, as I drifted to sleep, I dreamed of bridges. Not the kind that burned, but the kind that carried you forward. Sturdy, spanning over waters not yet crossed. In the dream, I stood on one and looked back once. Just once, and then forward again. Always forward. Days passed. The charges against Jenna made the papers. Not the front page, but enough to matter. I didn't clip the article. I didn't read the comments. I simply walked past the newsstand on my way to the market and bought a bar of lavender soap and a new pen. Back at Golden Pines, I sat by the koi pond and jotted a postcard to myself, in Paris. Dear Eleanor, you did not disappear, you returned. Love, me. A few residents stopped to say hello. Others waved from across the path. No one asked about Jenna. No one needed to. I wasn't the woman who'd been burned by coffee and betrayal anymore. I was the woman who ordered lemon cake for no reason, who danced at music night, who painted crooked koi and smiled at their imperfection. Gerald arrived with a new suitcase, sky blue with gold clasps, and insisted I practice packing the essentials. Not fear, not shame, not memory, just clothes, shoes, a guidebook, and curiosity. We laughed as I zipped it closed, not because of the trip, but because it no longer felt impossible. A week later, I stood at the gates of Golden Pines, suitcase in one hand, passport in the other, waiting for Gerald to pull up his car, gliding into view like the beginning of a new sentence. He got out, walked around, and opened the door like a gentleman. You ready, Eleanor? I looked at him, then at the life behind me, then toward the road ahead. Yes, I said. I am. We drove off quietly, music low, windows down, the wind threading through my silver hair. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I had already said goodbye, and in my chest, not grief, not regret, but something that felt suspiciously like joy. As the town faded behind us and the sky widened, I realized something beautiful. The greatest revenge isn't spite or punishment or shouting into locked rooms. It's living well. It's peace. It's Paris. And that's where I was going, not to escape, but to begin again. Not from loss, but from power. Because in the end, the story wasn't about what Jenna took, it was about what I reclaimed. And that was me. My name, my voice, my future. Eleanor Marks. Not victim, not burden, not bank account. Just a woman who locked the door one final time and opened the world instead.